Ruth Andrews, I'm so excited to have you sit down and talk with me because I think you have a message that a lot of women and men need to hear when it comes to mental health. But first we have to kind of establish some ground here. So I met you when you were at the height of like just taking on the business world here in Knoxville.
Yes, so we met when I was in my second career, which was a nonprofit CEO. I was CEO of the Girl Scout Council of the Southern Appalachians, which is the Girl Scout Council, the regional council headquartered here. I was a mother of 3. I was a triathlete. I thought I was a superhero. And most people thought I was too.
I thought you were a superhero
right.
too. Yeah. What was it like? So you didn't start out wanting to be a nonprofit CEO. Where did your career take you? Because you wanted to be a lawyer or real estate. What did you want to be?
Yeah. So I decided when I was 16 years old I wanted to be a lawyer. Okay. Did not reconsider that decision until my first week of law school. So I graduated from UTK with a poli-sci sociology degree, went straight to law school. I get to law school and I realized that I'm not the same person I was when I was 16 years old. In my personal life, there had been significant shifting and changing, essentially the implosion of my nuclear family in that period of time. But I couldn't think of what else I wanted to do. And I was like, well, the law degree won't hurt me, so I might as well stay here because what else do you do with a poli-sci sociology degree? So I completed that degree, and my first job out of law school, my first real job out of law school, I guess, was in property management and ultimately commercial brokerage at Hall Robb Commercial Realty. So I started there as a property manager leasing agent. By the time I left there in the summer of 2008, right before the bottom dropped out of the market, I was the executive vice president and was running a $3 million division of that company.
Wow.
And then we knew something was coming with the economy. We would have never anticipated what it was, but we restructured the company and I reorganized myself out of that job. And I had no idea what I wanted to do next because I had loved that company like it was my own for 10 years. By this time I had 2 children. I was the primary wage earner. And I did not know what I was going to do next, and people thought I was crazy for leaving a 10-year career, not having something else lined up. But I couldn't split my energy that way. I had loved Hall Robb so much for so long. I really had to wrap that season before I started to look again. And once I started to look again, by this time I'd done Leadership Knoxville, I'd been involved with United Way, had a lot of community relationships, and I started to network, and people are like, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I have no idea. When did what I want become relevant? Like,
it's all about plans and paths. I was on this path, and this was the plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was, I'm just supposed to do the next thing to get to this destination, which, we can talk about more. So I spent about 6 months really trying to figure out, like, what do I care about? And luckily, because I am a licensed attorney and had extensive experience in real estate, that one of my roles at Hall Robb included being the lawyer for all of our leasing. I was able to essentially freelance as a lawyer with a lawyer here in town who had extra work, didn't really want to build a firm, and so I was able to support myself and my family while I figured out what to do next.
An amazing backup, but okay.
Yeah, it's a great side hustle. And so I really came to the point of realizing that I really am passionate about helping individuals and communities and organizations reach their potential. So I was about to start my own consulting business, and I get a call from Robin Askew, who has actually played a role in several of my first 2 careers. And her husband, Dr. Jerry Askew, was on the search committee, this national search committee for this role for Girl Scouts. And she said, you need to take a look at this job. And I'd been a nonprofit board chair and really didn't think I wanted to be a nonprofit director, but I had just kind of done this work that said, you really care about helping organizations and communities reach their potential. I started reading the research from Girl Scouts of USA that said girls don't generally resonate with command and control leadership styles. They want to lead because they want to make a difference. It's a different type of leadership. And I really resonated with what they were saying and what they were doing. And they were merging 3 councils into a single council. They did this all across the country. but they were merging 3 into 1, and they were looking for a CEO to run a $5 million organization. And I'm like, okay, that actually sounds like a good challenge. And got that job. And so spent 6 years there.
So what was that like, being in charge of Girl Scouts? It's a lot of work. I'm not going to discount that portion, but the mission and what you're doing and changing the mindset of so many girls.
Yeah, I cared deeply about what we were doing. I was not a Girl Scout growing up.
Okay.
And so I really did not have that background. But what I had was a story that when I had gotten to college, it was the first time somebody looked at me, and this was actually a college peer. So I had joined a sorority at UTK, joined the sorority, and immediately was like, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Because because I'm actually an introvert, and I'm in a room full of screaming girls, and I'm like, it was kind of that thing. Like my sisters had been in a sorority, and so I was just doing that next thing that you
sorority,
do.
it's good. It's good.
And I was like, "Oh my God, what have I done?" And my pledge trainer looked at me, I think on the way home from the retreat or something. Maybe she could tell I was like, "Oh God, what have I done?" And she looked at me and she said, "We think you can be a leader."
Wow.
And I have no idea why she said that. I mean, I kind of joked because the next thing I knew I was pledge class president. So I don't know if it was just like teeing me up because they needed something to do, something, for that role. But it was the first time anybody had looked at me and said that. I actually come from an abusive childhood background. I'm a survivor of complex developmental trauma. If you know anything about ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Inventory, there's like 10 childhood experiences that can have a profound impact on your long-term physical and mental health. I have 6 of those out of 10.
Oh my gosh.
And interestingly, we were having a little conversation before we got started with this about you never know what somebody's going through.
That's right.
From the outside, I looked like I had a perfect life growing up. My father was a physician. We had a large house. We had expensive cars. We had essentially a live-in nanny. But I was living with emotional and physical abuse every day up until I was about a teenager. And that caregiver who also abused me went to treatment for alcoholism when I was 15 years old. So I had grown up being told I was never going to be good enough. And so to have somebody look at me and say, "We think you can be a leader." I was actually depressed when I didn't know this at the time, but in hindsight, when I got to college, I was actually depressed because of the things that had happened, not only in my childhood, but in those few years I referenced where everything just kind of imploded. And if that person had not looked at me and said, "We think you can be a leader," and given me something to do where I felt like I could bring value, I don't know what my college career would have looked like. But because she did that, I became pledge class president, and then I was secretary, and then I was vice president, and somewhere in there I got involved in student government, and then I worked with Dr. Askew to bring back student evaluations, and then I was the election commissioner for SGA and did student orientation, and that was the first time I felt a sense of self-efficacy and like I mattered. So even though I had not been a Girl Scout, I knew how powerful it was to have somebody look at you and say, "You matter."
Yeah.
And we see potential in you. And it really changed the course of my life. And so that was the story, which I did not tell the full version of that story for really a long time. But that was the connection, the emotional connection that I had to the work that we were doing at Girl Scouts, was looking at girls and saying, "You can be a leader. No matter where you are or where you're from, you can make a positive difference in this world."
So then carrying that load of doing the work as CEO, because when I look at CEOs, I'm not going to lie, I go, how do people balance all of that and then come home and do life? And it's a lot. What happened during that time that caused you eventually to say, "Okay, this is enough of this"?
Okay, so what ultimately, I'll start it with the end and then back up.
Okay.
What made me come to the point of saying this is enough is I literally was brought to my knees. What contributed to that was I was really good at the hustle. I was really good at pushing myself beyond my capacity. So I got to Girl Scouts in 2009. I had my third child in 2010. And in that time in my life, we both agreed, everybody thought I was a superhero.
Yeah.
And the only person I told when I didn't feel like a superhero was my mother. We were not close when I was growing up, but we had developed a relationship when I was in my 20s. And she was the only person I reached out to when I felt overwhelmed, when I felt afraid, when I didn't know how I was going to keep all the plates spinning. She had been living with cancer actually since 1999. But in 2011, 6 months after my son was born. So I'm CEO, triathlete,
new mom
of my third child, primary wage earner. Her cancer diagnosis changed to imminently terminal.
Oh.
And basically her cancer mutated. And I started having anxiety attacks. And I didn't even know I didn't know what an anxiety attack was. But I literally felt like there were bricks on my chest. And I had this distinct feeling. I literally was like, there's Pandora's box, like somewhere in here, and the lid's about to come off the box. And I don't even know what's in the box, but I am pretty certain that if the lid comes off the box, I am not going to be able to get it back on. It was kind of this sense of like the whole house of cards has been built on quicksand, and you're about to lose your foundation. And so I started struggling with anxiety attacks. My mother passed away in April of 2012. And at Girl Scouts at the same time, I am driving systemic, cultural, strategic, operational transformation across our entire organization. So much so that I'm being invited to speak and facilitate and participate in strategic planning conversations for the movement as a whole. You know, I'm speaking at the gatherings of our national CEOs and our council CEOs and board chairs. I mean, I'm killing it professionally. But I started to have anxiety attacks. And then in the summer of 2012, I tell the story, the thing that broke me was 7 raccoons that had taken up residence in my attic. Literally, like
it was like the last thing. Like it's just one more thing.
The last thing.
Yeah.
It was like I cannot
right.
do this. Now, because of everything I've learned after this time in my life, what I understand is my nervous system essentially collapsed. Like I just couldn't anymore. I had been running and pushing, and I was starting to get sick more and more often. My immune system was starting to struggle. I'd actually been living with hormonal imbalances for years, not understanding the connection. And my nervous system collapsed, and I went into depression. I started taking a generic antidepressant. I did that thing where you go to your doctor and they're like, "How are you?" and you just
unload,
just start crying.
Yeah.
And they prescribed me a general antidepressant. I started taking that antidepressant on the same day I did my second Olympic distance triathlon of that year. And that was August of 2012. And by October of 2012, I remember being alone with my son at home. He was, 1.5, 18 months old, 2. And I'm reading my life insurance policy to see if it'll pay in the event I take my life by suicide. Because I was I couldn't figure out how to pull myself up by my bootstraps, which is what I had always done. So I finally reached out for help.
Wait, but you really thought about taking your own life?
Absolutely. And I think I scared myself, honestly. And it was actually, again, in hindsight, not the first time in my life I'd had suicidal ideation. I'd had it as a teenager, but again, not really understanding mental health or anything about it. So I started therapy. I finally went and saw a psychiatrist. All of this, of course, under the radar, because you don't, as
we
a
don't
CEO,
talk about those out loud.
Run around till,
Oh, yeah.
I remember going into the therapist's office always like this.
Yeah.
Like, please nobody see me. I mean, I was a semi-public figure in this community, and I'm like, please nobody see me here. And the psychiatrist told me two things that I still remember. She said, number one, trauma changes your brain, particularly if you experience it while your brain is developing. And number two, if you don't start sleeping, we are not going to be able to help you heal.
That was the second thing she said?
It was the second thing she said, because I was only sleeping like 4 hours a night because I was so amped all the time from the overdose of adrenaline, cortisol that I'd basically been relying on to function probably for decades at this point. She said, if you do not sleep, we can't help you heal. Because what I know now is when we sleep, there's all these incredible healing processes that take place in the body and the mind. We cleanse from the toxins of the day. We repair the muscles and the tissues and the memory and all of the things. And so I was doing all of this on 4 to 6 hours of sleep a night, between having small children at home and then just living a life completely amped all the time. So I started taking medication both for depression and anxiety and to help me sleep. We changed my sleep medication actually in the next February because I was having recurring nightmares that I was being hunted by an assassin. And so that was 2013 by the time we changed that medication, and I just kept pushing. I went to therapy, I took my medication, I got more sleep, but you
still were doing all the things.
I was still doing all of the things. And starting in the fall of 2014 and into 2015, I just kept getting sicker and sicker. Sometimes I had 4 infections at the same time. I was always one of those people who, if I got sick, I'd just go to the doctor, get some antibiotics, and go back to work. There were more and more periods where I could literally barely get off the couch. I was forced to stop endurance training because my body, I would either start hyperventilating or my GI tract would just blow up. And any endurance athletes out there will understand what I'm talking about. I gained weight rapidly after I stopped endurance training. I developed high blood pressure, acid reflux. At one point I had a full heart workup to rule out a heart attack because my anxiety symptoms were that intense that it presented like a heart attack. And I just kept trying to pull myself back together and go back out there. And it kept getting harder and harder and harder. And in the spring of 2015, I reached that point of like, this is never going to get better.
So when you have that moment, because I'm pretty sure you kept saying that to yourself, but that final time where you're like, this really isn't going to get better, what do you do? Because successful people, they stay looking successful in public.
Well, so what happened is I made a plan to take my own life. Like, I wrote the letters. And at this point, my marriage was in trouble, my 18-year marriage. And I started to put that plan into motion. I was like, I felt like I'd lived 80 years in 40. I felt like I was never going to find my way out of the darkness. I really believed that my children would be better off without me if they did not have a mother who was mentally ill. Because at this point, I'd been actively struggling with mental illness for 3-4 years and just trying to show up. And I made that plan, and then I ended up, because I'm super type A, or was more than I am now, I went to therapy. I went actually to the marriage counselor in a one-on-one session and my own therapist in the same day. And I told them, I said, I'm done. I can't do this. And they both told me the same thing. They said, your children will never recover if you take your own life. They said, of all of the things that we treat people for, they'll never get over it. Because as a as a survivor of childhood abuse and all of the other things that happened in my household, I'd spent my entire time as a mother trying to break the chains of what had happened to me.
Right, right.
And I was like, well, I can't harm them in that way. And so I realized I had to live. And I had no idea how I was going to do it. And on the days it was really, really hard and I wasn't sure I could make it, I would say, you can always die tomorrow, but not today. And as you can imagine, which I can't even describe for you, somewhere in all of this, my leadership capacity started to suffer. Like I can't tell you when or where it became apparent to my organization that I was struggling. Because again, we weren't talking about, even if people knew, we weren't talking about it. But ultimately, I resigned my position and my divorce was finalized in the same week of October 2015.
That would break most people. That's a lot in 1 week.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Was it in any way freeing for you? Or was it you weren't at that point yet?
I was broken. I was heartbroken. Because I said I loved what I did and I was really good at it. And also, I know that my body and mind could not continue. And ultimately, going through what I went through saved my life. Because when you get to the place of, the dark night of the soul, followed by essentially losing everything that you have worked for, except my children, everything that you have, like I'd spent my entire career trying to get to this place where you feel safe and successful and worthy and, valuable. When you lose all of that at once, after the heartbreak, I think there is the freedom because I didn't have to play by anybody else's rules anymore.
I wanted you to come on Voices because I feel like there are a lot of women, like we're not all CEOs, but we all are in our own little miniature world of being the CEO of our lives. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of women and men can relate to that balancing act and feeling where it may not be to the point that you experienced it, but some days are just a lot. Yeah. And you found a way to almost rebrand yourself and use what happened to you to reach out and help people. So you're like on this mental health journey, spreading the word. What are you doing now?
So what I do now is I talk to people about what's true about being human, is that we are all living in an untenable world, a 24/7 world that has incredible demands on our time and energy and capacity. The ways that we have been taught to respond to stress and our own, frankly, our own traumas are actually antithetical to the things that help us stay well or get well. And so I use my story to open the door to conversations around mental health, to talk about the true impact of stress and burnout. Like I didn't know what burnout was when it happened to me. To talk about the fact that trauma, all of our traumas, is having a profound impact on, again, our physical health, our mental health, our well-being. It's affecting the way we show up in the world. It's affecting the way we treat each other. We have a hard time often acknowledging other people's pain because we're not acknowledging our own, because we weren't taught the skills and resources and tools to sit with our pain, to process our trauma, which can be done. We are all carrying around decades worth sometimes of stress and traumatic energy that is wreaking havoc on our bodies and minds and our relationships and our communities and our organizations. We don't understand what's happening. We don't realize that we can interrupt the cycle. We don't realize that pretty much all of our most popularized coping strategies are not only ineffective, but often make it worse.
Right.
We haven't
Relax
been
and have a glass of wine. Go retail therapy. All
Exactly.
the things that we do.
Exactly. And we are in a society that is becoming increasingly ill in so many ways. And it doesn't have to be that way. I've spent the last 8 years healing from my own trauma, engaging with a variety of modalities to heal my body and mind, to realize that there is no there. Like, you're never going to get there.
Yes.
Yeah.
It keeps like I told you earlier, the goalpost, it keeps moving.
Yes.
You bought a house, you need a bigger house. You got a
right.
car, you need a name brand car.
That's right.
It just keeps moving.
Learning to stop running from our pain. So I did a bike ride. This was years ago with Mike Carroll, and we were doing a long distance bike ride, and he said, endurance athletes are either running towards something or away from something, and most of them are running away from something.
Ooh.
We spend so much energy running from our pain, as opposed to turning and, with the support that we need, as we need it, honoring that pain and letting that pain move through our body so our body can heal. Our bodies have incredible capacity to heal. We just haven't been taught how. And we haven't been taught how to support each other. So that's what I do. I'm out there saying, okay, yes, we have lots of problems, and there are some root cause solutions to the problems that we are all experiencing. And let's do that. Let's work on the root causes. Let's stop running. Let's stop blaming. Let's stop letting our trauma hijack the way we show up in the world, or stress. I mean, toxic stress and trauma have essentially the same ultimate profound impact on the way the body operates and the way we function in the world. Let's stop, let's choose to stop and choose to do it differently before our body chooses for us. So, circling back, you said, what made you stop? My body made me stop.
Right.
I fought it and fought it and fought. I fought it until I literally could not fight it anymore. And yeah.
So what's your message to women, mothers who are watching, who are especially those with younger kids, and they're just kind of in the thick of it? Like,
Yes.
life, it's so much life happening at one time.
So much life happening at one time.
What would you tell Booth back then? What do they need to know?
They need to know that it's okay to ask for help. And that if people in their lives are telling them why they shouldn't need help, go find new people. They need to know that no one does it all without help. They need to know that there are seasons of our lives. There are things that I haven't done professionally for the last 8 years, not only because I was focused on healing, but also because I was focused on being present with my children. And there are things that I have not prioritized and that I don't do, and I make choices about how I spend my time and energy. And they also need to know that I understand what it feels like to not even be able to figure out which things I can lay down.
Right.
Which I think is a nervous system response in and of itself. But there are ways to support your body and mind so that you can show up more fully in your life based on your priorities and your needs. And they don't have to do it alone.
You talked a lot about, or you've mentioned several times about how, we didn't talk about that back then, and we're talking about mental health. Do you feel like there's a shift in that? Well, first, how did it feel once you started talking about it? Because that had to be scary to publicly acknowledge, hey, I'm going through some things and it's serious.
The first time I told my story out loud was 2018, and I was probably shaking the whole time. Yes, I do think it's changing, both because of the pandemic and what that brought to the forefront, also because generationally, I think younger generations are already more comfortable speaking about their mental health. And I think organizations and probably communities are being forced to face the reality that whether or not we talk about it, it is affecting us in a myriad of ways. It's affecting organizational bottom lines, the fact that people are struggling. Absenteeism rates, presenteeism rates, lack of employee engagement, all of those are tied to toxic stress, burnout, trauma. And yes, it was a defining moment for me to decide to speak about it publicly because again, 2016, 2017, we were not going out there and telling people. I went from, literally hiding my face in my therapist's office. But what I understood when I started talking about it was that not owning my story, not understanding what my life experiences had, the impact that they had had on my body and mind and how I was showing up in the world almost killed me. And I knew how alone I felt and how feeling so alone in it was a compounding factor in making the mental health and the suicidal ideation and ultimately planning worse. And I wanted to let people know that they weren't alone. And now I want people to know they're not alone, and also it doesn't have to be this way.
Right. You don't have to live in that. You can
decide. You don't have to know how you're going to survive, but you do get to decide. I have I think a podcast out there that says, your trauma is not your trauma is not your fault, but it is your responsibility, because only you can decide to heal. Only you can decide, I'm not going to live this way anymore. And once you decide that, you don't have to know what the path before you looks like, but you can say, okay, and the next thing I'm going to do to support myself on this journey, or to make the decision that is for me and not for everybody else, is this decision. I'm going to make this decision, and then you make the next decision and the next decision. But you do have to decide, and only you can come to that place of saying, essentially it was like, I have to save myself. Leaving's not an option. I have to save myself. And I didn't do it alone by any stretch, but only I could make the decision that I was no longer willing, for me, that I had to choose to live. And then it was, okay, I'm not going to sweep this under the rug, and I'm going to honor what is true. And I'm going to try to help other people on that path.
Mm-hmm. You speak now to organizations and businesses. Why? What does your story and testimony, do for them?
Partly because there's still stigma, there's still fear, there's still a lot of misunderstanding around mental health, trauma, triggers, burnout, stress, all of the things. And there's a lot of misinformation out there, but there's also a lot of fear. And there's a lot of organizations that want to help their people and they're not sure how. Me coming in and telling my story often just opens the door to the conversation. We can't heal what we are ignoring and acting like isn't there. So often organizations bring me in to open that door. It's safer for me to tell my story than it is for them to start telling their internal stories, but maybe I'm the gateway to having more conversations that need to be had. So a lot of organizations use me just to open that door and to start, to begin.
How are you today?
I'm really good. I feel like my healing journey, I think I'll be on it for the rest of my life. I think I will spend the rest of my life, and in part because I'm a survivor of childhood abuse, finding my way back to the person I was before my caregivers and the world told me who I was supposed to be. Mm-hmm. And every step that I take back toward that person, every ounce of work that I do toward releasing traumatic energy and unresolved stress cycles and healing my body and mind, we have an incredible capacity for wholeness. And I am more present and more alive in my experience. Like when I was a CEO, I had all the things that I was supposed to have, and I was empty and exhausted. I have more presence, more life than I've ever had, for as long as I can remember.
I just hope somebody takes away just a little something. Maybe it's just to stop and pause for a little bit and to evaluate. I think sometimes we're moving so fast, we don't stop and go like, is this working? Like, is this really working for me? And I hope your story does that.
I hope so too.
You've blessed me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.